welcome to Better Understandings of Science, specifically my lectures on interpersonal communication. Today we're going to be discussing considering self. So first things first, the self is this evolving composite of self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. The first component of self is self-awareness. And that's going to be the ability to view yourself as a unique person, distinct from your surrounding environment, and to reflect on your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It's a process of turning the lens on yourself and examining the image you see therein. One way that you can develop this sense of self is by monitoring your behaviors, your own behaviors, and forming specific impressions of who you might be from these observations. Consider what you are picking up from what you are observing there. A greater sense of self is going to develop as we observe ourselves. And it's going to also assign meaning to others by proxy. So behaviors, and you're going to be able to compare it with our behavior. This is also a process that we call social comparison, right? You can really increase your chance of self-awareness and ultimately your interpersonal communication skills as a whole just by practicing critical self-reflection. You need to learn to ask yourself really 5 questions about communication behavior. You're going to say, look at it. It's going to be 1, what am I thinking and feeling? 2, why am I thinking and feeling this way? 3, how am I communicating? 4, how are my thoughts and feelings influencing my communications? And 5, how can I improve my thoughts, feelings, and communication? So, by understanding and asking those questions, you can go a long way of determining better, yourself. By applying that self-reflection, your self-awareness will grow. The second component of self is going to be your self-concept, and that's going to be the overall perception of who you are, who you perceive yourself to be. While self-awareness is your ability to focus a lens upon yourself, self-concept is the picture taken through that lens. You understand? So your self-concept is based on beliefs, attitudes, and values you have about yourself. So the beliefs, these are going to be convictions that certain things are true. They just are. Attitudes, Attitudes are going to evaluate appraisals, right? And then values represent these enduring principles that guide your interpersonal actions, right? Your self-concept is shaped by a number of factors, including your family, your friends, gender, culture, the list goes on and on. All these things influence what your self-concept is. One of the biggest influences, though, on your self-concept is how you think others see you, all right? So sociologist Charles Horton Cooley, he referred to this phenomenon as the looking glass self. For example, do you think others see you as attractive, talented, athletic, any number of things? How do you think people see you? And this can be a very strong motivation. Self-concept clarity is going to be the degree to which you have clearly defined, consistent and enduring sense of self. Because your self-concept is going to consist of deeply held beliefs, attitudes, and values, changing that is extremely difficult to do. And I think we may have touched on this in another lecture before. about those, especially within our last lecture. We talked about certain institutions influencing culture and things like that. And the same thing happens with our self-concept clarity and how we see ourselves as well. All of those things influence us, but being able to self-reflect and self-assess, go in there and look and see just why did I make this specific decision? Considering this host of specific ideals, or why did I specifically vote on this person, or why did I specifically choose this vehicle, or the list goes on and on. All of those things, all those choices. That's not to say that there's no sense of choice, that free will is a thing that is gone and can never be obtained, and that's just not true. In fact, self-analyzing yourself, taking and getting closer to that clarity, that self-concept clarity, getting closer to this actually moves you more into a realm of free choice than you might think, because then you can start to recognize all those influences and all those things that go in to help construct your choices, to help make you think, or to help you decide on things that you want to do. And all of those things, once you start to do that reflection, they're changeable, especially when you figure out, whose belief system is this, mine or something that I've been taught. So our self-concepts, often is going to lead us to some self-fulfilling prophecies. These are going to be like predictions about future interactions that lead us to behave in ways that ensure the interaction unfolds as we predicted. Some of these self-fulfilling prophecies, they set positive events in motion, but others really set a negative, chain of effects to really take us down. So it's very important to understand self-fulfilling prophecies, and by self-clarity, self-reflection, you can help to try to prevent fulfilling negative prophecies within, your future, within your choices. Third component of self is going to be self-esteem. Okay, and that's going to be the overall value that we assign to ourselves. So interpersonal communication, relationships, and physical and mental health, all of these things are going to be shaped by your self-esteem. If you check out self-discrepancy theory, this is a theory that suggests that your self-esteem is determined by how you think about yourself along the lines of two mental standards, right? The first standard is going to be the ideal self. That's going to be comprised of the characteristics you want to possess. Okay, your ideal self, the person you wish to be, right? And then the second is going to be your ought self. And this is the person that others, like family, friends, society, everybody else, this is going to be what they expect, they wish and expect you to be. This is your should or supposed to be self from the viewpoint of others, right? There's a lot of that going on, especially in political climate that we're in now here in the United States, where we have a very strong dichotomy here going of what we should be and what we are and what we choose to be in that ideal self. Self-discrepancy theory, it also maintains that self-esteem improves as we reduce discrepancies between our ideal and our ought selves, right? So the closer that we start to hone in on these, the more scrutiny that we give these two concepts, and the more that we try to reduce those discrepancies between what people think we should be and what we want to be. When we start to funnel that down into this little narrow thing, that's when self-esteem starts to grow a little bit more. So your self-esteem will actually improve in that concept. And that's, again, self-discrepancy theory. Your self-esteem can start to improve, only when you're, reducing these discrepancies between your ideal and ought self. But methods of achieving this goal, they are things like assessing self-concept, um, assessing, how you tend to see yourself, how you conceptualize yourself, analyzing your ideal self, and that's, think, do I really want these certain specific ideals? What do these specific ideals mean to me? Are they game changers, for a better me? They may not necessarily make a better me. Are you analyzing those? And another one is going to be analyzing the ought self, outside pressures, people looking in on you, family, friends, social networks, all this good stuff. Everybody looking in on you and telling you what you should be, right? It's not all the best. It's not all great advice. However, that being said, there are some points, some valid points that we should probably take out of that as a social animal. It's not all garbage, right? Sure, we want to be our unique selves. We want to be our ideal selves. But what does that mean in the grand scheme of things if I can't communicate with others, if I can't participate with others? So we all know that person that's, oh, I don't care what happens, they're only going to get the real me, and I'm going to tell the truth no matter what. That's just the way it is, and it's great. But when it comes to inviting people to parties and things like that, you know who to invite and who not to invite. And sometimes those brash, rough around the edges people, we don't typically like to hang around. And that affects self-esteem eventually. Those persons that don't get to partake in those kinds of things. So it's important to understand that. Another way is to potentially revise and redefine your standards of the ideal self and the ought self. Okay, what kind of standards am I holding myself up to? Because if you're not meeting those standards, again, that's going to impact that self-esteem. If you can't be that person, that go-to person, that person that's, everybody always wants to talk to and all that good stuff, no matter how hard you try, sometimes that can affect your self-esteem to a great deal. One way you can do this too, another way of maybe achieving these goals would be to potentially try to create an action plan for resolving any of these self-discrepancies that you might have. I know it sounds regimented and I know it sounds very formulaic, but some of us work better in structure. I'm one of those folks. I'm one of those people who I've outlined before I write, and I make sure that I got all my ducks in a row and all this stuff. So sometimes, creating an action plan, a way that putting something down on paper, or putting something into the computer or a journal or something of that nature, it's going to be something that you can then go back to and motivate yourself more. Next, you want to make sure that you are diversifying your investments in yourself. And you need to do this by pursuing multiple interests and activities. Another thing you can do is focus on culture. How does the media shape your self-esteem? Standards informing our ideal and ought selves are shaped by the media, and we touched on this a little bit already. It's just absolutely done. That doesn't mean you are absolutely 100% a slave to the media, that you are being manipulated 24/7 by the media. You're only going to be manipulated by anything or anyone as long as you allow it to happen. So ask yourselves, how is this thing shaping me? Although that media is going to be present digitally, present digitally enhanced media, images, we're prone to compare ourselves with these images. Even if we're not talking about a political base, if we're just talking about how many magazines or websites have you gone on and you've seen, skinny women or buff dudes, ultra buff dudes, and all this stuff, and we have this. It gives us a standard, this unattainable, most of the time, standard that we're supposed to then go and chase, and that can be a big issue. But that's in our nature to compare ourselves to these things, to these images. It's not a fault of your own. The And ultimately, the internalization of these standards often contribute to a low self-esteem. When we can't achieve these goals, these buff goals, some people just aren't predisposed to get buff. Some people just hit a certain point and that's it. That's what they've got. They're genetically predisposed to be that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But media, outside influences, and things like that often will tell us, mostly subconsciously, that this is what we should strive for. So, what about gender, family experiences, and cultural factors? These are three outside sources that also shape our sense of self. So, a gender, this is going to be a composite of social, and we've talked about this before. This is a composite of social, psychological, and behavioral attributes that a particular culture associates with an individual's biological sex, and that characterizes us as male or female. This does not say you are, this is a social construct, okay? This doesn't mean that this isn't your sex at birth kind of thing. Born male, born female. It's what we then ascribe to those features as a society. Gender is going to differ from biological sex in that physical characteristics with which we are born. In gender, this is largely, learned or constructed through these social interactions that we have. The concept of boys like blue and girls like pink, these kinds of things. If you look at other cultures throughout the world, the blue-pink similarities for male and female, that stuff goes out the window for some cultures. They have no concept of that. Immediately after birth, we begin this lifelong process of gender socialization. We learn it from others, what it means to be a male or a female often. And we internalize that. Through the socialization process, we develop our gender identity, our innate sense of ourselves as boy, man, a male, girl, woman, or a female, or another variation such as, gender neutral or gender nonconforming. Sometimes there are often points where we do begin that lifelong process of gender socialization. We continue to try to figure these things out, but it's not always so simple and cut and dry. It's not something that we just pick up and that we take off with. It's not something where I was raised by my mother and father, and I learned my male traits from my father, internalized those and took them up. But sometimes it works in a very different way where, maybe sometimes that doesn't feel like a genuine self of who we are. Just because, I spent all my life socializing or, trying to, gender socialize after my father and my friends and all that stuff, and I'm trying to partake in that, that male game, that doesn't necessarily mean that, I internalize that as it being fit to me. So there are those internal struggles for a lot of people that, may have grown up gender socializing as women and stopped wanting to live what they felt was a lie and took it and turned it into and made themselves a more genuine self or more genuine to themselves. Boys are just often taught to be masculine, we're taught to be assertive. We're taught to be competitive. We're taught independence and all this stuff. And girls, they're taught, these feminine behaviors, like compassion and, nurturance and sensitivity and all that stuff, right? That doesn't mean as a male you can't be nurturing or be sensitive or have compassion. Take for example, the Will Smith meme that was going around, I guess, a month or so ago, where Jada Pinkett Smith came out and said something about that she had been having an affair and he looked like he was about to cry. They took a still shot of that image and they have been using it all across social networking as this means of, as this kind of laughable, this is not what men do. And that's just not that's got some people up in arms for good reason, because why can't men feel that way? Why can't we cry? So early family experiences, how we come to see ourselves, all these things shape our beliefs regarding the functions, rewards, and dependability of interpersonal relationships that we might have, right? So these beliefs, they help shape two dimensions of our thoughts, feelings, and behavior: attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance. Those are the two you really need to look at. So, attachment anxiety, this is the degree to which a person fears rejection, uh, specifically by relationship partner. Attachment avoidance, this is going to be the degree to which someone desires close interpersonal ties. Four attachment styles that we can derive from these two dimensions, right? And I take these directly from the text that you read. First, you're going to have, individuals with secure attachment have a low anxiety and avoidance regarding relationships with others, seek closeness, and have confidence in their abilities to handle problems that may arise, right? Individuals with this preoccupied attachment are high anxiety and low in avoidance. They desire closeness, but they're plagued with fear of rejection, and they may use sexual contact to satisfy their need to feel loved. Individuals with dismissive attachment have low anxiety but high avoidance. They view close relationships as comparatively unimportant. Instead, they tend to prize and prioritize self-reliance instead. Finally, you have this fearful attachment. This is both high in attachment anxiety and avoidance, and they are going to fear rejection and tend to shun relationships, right? So both fearing rejection and shunning of the relationships. They may develop a relationship only if there's a guarantee that their partners must rely on them. But even then, they're going to still suffer and harbor some serious, doubts about what's going on. So another outside source of self, that's going to be culture. Okay, and that's a big one, and I think that we should spend a little time on that one. Again, culture is this established, coherent set of beliefs, attitudes, values, all the things that we've already talked about before. All these things that are kind of like perpetuated by your surroundings. It may include nationality, as well as ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, physical and mental ability levels, and even age. All of these things come into play when you consider culture, and they all have, cultural baggage that come along with them. They are the cultural baggage. Most of us belong to more than one culture at a time. We can process beliefs, attitudes, and values of each one at the same time as we go. Whenever we communicate with others, we often present ourselves to them. Sometimes we present a public self, and that's going to mirror our private selves. Sometimes we don't do that. Again, I think I brought this up in our first lecture on this lecture series. Sometimes when we go on dates or when we meet new people, they don't meet us. They meet our representative. And that's what I'm talking about with that. Most of us, like I said, are going to belong to those. But sometimes those points that we belong to, sometimes they clash. I struggled with this myself, especially when I first returned to college. I grew up again in a very conservative household in Georgia, very deep South minded, Bible Belt, very fixed in their ways. And on one hand, I love where I came from. I do. I absolutely do. And I cherish every minute that I spent in Georgia. I still have great relationships with people down there and all that good stuff. But on the other hand, a lot of the ideals and principles that they hold, I no longer hold, or I have come to find a different path. And quite often, these two parts of my culture clash. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm as guilty as the next person. Sometimes I'm not able to navigate it that well myself. I'm just not. I still find myself asking, well, how could you possibly believe this, or how could you possibly do that? And the bottom line is, I was that way too. I was that way too. And now that culture that I had is clashing with this new ideal, this notion, this concept of self that I have today. So your public self, your face, this is how you want others to see you and know you. You actively create and present this face through communication, whether you want to or not. A mask is this public, self-designed, strategic veil, right, that we use to hide our private self. And masks can be subtle, dramatic. They can be crafted to inflate our abilities. They could be numerous. We often form a strong emotional attachment to our face as well. I mean, that face is going to represent the person we most want other people to see. So that face that we may build, that face that we may inflate or dramatize or any of that stuff, that face is going to be the face that we really want to drive home. And that's the face we most want to be known by. And that can often cause trouble. Sometimes after we've created a certain face, we reveal information that contradicts it. And that's going to cause us to lose face. This is also going to be known as embarrassment. When we turn out and we appear as hypocrites. These are deep stabs to our social self, to ourself. And they can definitely impact self-esteem to a great deal. You often can maintain your face by engaging in communication and behaviors that mesh with the knowledge that others already have about you, instead of trying to provide things that may not be there, instead of embellishing. You can remedy an embarrassing situation, I guess. You can try to restore your face, I guess, by acknowledging that the event happened. You are accepting responsibility for your actions, and apologize if you have to. Revealing private information about yourself to others is known as self-disclosure. If you look into your readings, or if you want to Google it, according to the interpersonal process model of intimacy, the closeness that we often feel towards others in our relationships, that's created through two things, right? That's created through self-disclosure and responsiveness to listeners, which we don't seem to have enough of these days. There's 4 practical implications that flow from the interpersonal process model of intimacy. One is going to be, you can't have intimacy in a relationship without disclosure and supportiveness. You can't do it. 2, if listeners are non-supportive after a disclosure, the impact on intimacy can be really devastating, right? If you have opened up and you have, spilled your guts about, that thing that is really at you, and it's met with resistance, it can be tough. It really can be tough. 3rd, you can share your thoughts and feelings with someone. That doesn't mean you have an intimate relationship just because you did that. Intimacy really only exists when both people are sharing and supporting each other. There's one-sided intimacy just doesn't work. And people find this out in, all the time in very hard ways. But one-sided intimacy just doesn't exist. To be intimate takes both parties participating. And finally, not all disclosures boost intimacy. They just don't. Sometimes just having that truth out there, it can be a good thing, really. Sometimes it can have the negative response that you would be looking for. But it doesn't necessarily always mean that you're going to be more intimate with that person. It may say that I trust that person a little bit more, but it doesn't promise, it doesn't guarantee intimacy. Research studies have shown that there are 5 specific facts regarding self-disclosure, okay? One is going to be, in any culture, people vary widely in the degree to which they self-disclose. Doesn't matter, not every culture is the same. Not everyone is the same, okay? And people disclose more quickly, broadly, and deeply when interacting online rather than interacting face to face. Go figure, right? Um, to help ensure a competent online disclosure, though, you should disclose information slowly and with caution. And remember that online communication is public and permanent. Those two things can really come back to bite you. So be very careful when you are looking at doing this online. Even though it can tend to be easier, it can tend to have more disastrous effect. Self-disclosure appears to promote mental health and relieve stress. And contrary to stereotypes, both men and women disclose deeply and broadly. But fellas will sometimes go around and we'll say stuff like, quit crying like a little girl, or don't whine about it, or don't whatever. The thing is we're disciplining each other when we don't follow our gender role. If we don't follow our gender roles, we tend to discipline each other as men. Men share just as deeply. So developing strong relationships is dependent on making ourselves known to others. This isn't an easy thing to do. Exposing yourself to others can make you feel vulnerable, provoking uneasiness, specifically between how much to reveal versus how much to keep hidden. Social penetration theory is this way, it explains how we reveal ourselves in layers. Everybody's seen the movie Shrek, right? And he talks about how ogres have layers. They're like an onion, right? And the text that I have you guys read actually uses this as an example. But it's what Shrek was talking about in that, strangely, was based on social penetration theory. At the outermost peripheral layers of the self are these demographic characteristics, such as your birthplace, age, gender, ethnicity, these things. At the intermediate layer, you are going to have your attitudes and opinions. Okay? And then at the deepest levels, these are your central layers. These are going to include core characteristics like self-awareness, self-concept, self-esteem, personal values, traits, fears, all that stuff. Okay? You develop closer relationships by revealing more personal aspects of yourself to others. Breadth is the number of different aspects of self that each partner reveals at each layer. Depth is going to involve how deeply into one another's self the partners have penetrated. The rate at which social penetration occurs in relationships isn't consistent. The speed with which people grant another person access to the broader and deeper aspects of themselves depends on a variety of factors. Intimacy, though, that feeling of closeness, that union that exists between us and our partners, that increases the more we penetrate into each other's selves. So another means that we can think about how we manage revealing ourselves in relationship is the Johari window. And this suggests that some quadrants of ourselves, they're open to self-reflection and sharing with other people, while others remain hidden, both to other people and ourselves, strangely. During the early stages of a relationship, our hidden selves, our hidden area, is relatively large compared with the public area that we have. We reveal information that was previously hidden in order to become better acquainted with others, and we do this little bits at a time. Yet the unknown and blind areas remain fairly stable. To improve ourselves, we have to learn to see into our blind area and then address the aspects that contribute to incompetent communication and relationship challenges. So competent self-disclosure involves skills that can be developed and improved. Consider these recommendations uh, for competently communicating yourself to others. First, you need to know yourself. And I know that comes from the old adage, know thyself, right? Know yourself before discussing. Make sure that you're ready and certain about aspects of yourself that you're going to reveal, okay? Don't go into this thinking maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. There has to be a definite, you have to have come to a decision to make it happen, right? Otherwise, it may feel somewhat regretful. Second, you want to know your audience. You guys in college, I know you're tired of hearing, know your audience, but it's just the truth. It doesn't matter if we're talking technical communication, if we're talking professional writing, it doesn't matter if we're talking about general psychology or psychiatry or social psychology. It doesn't matter, any of that. You have to know your audience. They all use these same kinds of instincts. Think about how others are going to perceive you and how they're going to perceive your disclosure, how it's going to impact their thoughts and feelings about you. Number three, don't force others to self-disclose. Just because you're telling something, don't expect the same in return. It doesn't have to happen that way. It's not some transactional operation where you're going to get something in return like that. Okay, you might get something in return depending on how they're going to feel and how they're going to react, but not necessarily, you're not going to necessarily get the exact same thing from them, right? Simply state your willingness and availability to listen to the other if that's what they want to do. Avoid gender stereotypes. Some men more readily disclose than do women. And again, as men, we tend to discipline each other when it comes to this kind of stuff, when we're disclosing certain things, especially to friends. But we all have those true friends that we listen to, and we give them that respect, or we should. Be sensitive to cultural differences as well. When you're interacting with people from different backgrounds, you need to disclose gradually. That being said, I would still, even people within the same background, often some of the best course of action to take is gradual disclosing. We don't want to overwhelm our audience, right? And go slowly. Go slowly. There's nothing wrong with that. Share intermediate and central aspects of yourself gradually and only after, thorough discussion of peripheral information. So how you present yourself online is very important, especially in our technology-dominated world. This includes everything from what you say online to the images you post and even what others say about you. And I know some of us don't care. Again, we all know the person. I'm going to be me. I don't care. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. If people will accept it or they won't. Okay. But we do run into problems when we try to live socially and in a professional world in those kinds of cases, right? I always tell my students in my technical communication classrooms and in public speaking classrooms, I tell them, make sure that the first thing you do when you go home tonight is you set your Facebook profile to private, and do the same with Twitter and everybody else, because some of the first things job employers are going to do is they're going to go and they're going to look up on you. They're going to look and check up on you. Not only that, but I mean, we are living in a very surveillant world right now, especially with all the political turmoil, the divide, the political divide that we're all living through right this minute. There's this panoptic system that we have become entrenched within, where what we used to think we were being observed, when we used to think we were just being observed and we try to do the right thing, now we are actually being observed on a daily basis. Too often people are, posting some silly nonsense on Facebook, and it comes back to haunt them at their jobs. So make sure that you consider these things. And I always tell people, go turn that stuff to private. That should be one of the first things you do. So presenting your own self online it provides unique benefits and challenges. A majority of a major benefit that you're going to find online, especially within the interactions, it's going to be this ability to control the information you share with others. You have that ability. You have that ability to control that information. For example, many people, they're presenting themselves in ways that amplify positive personality characteristics such as warmth and friendliness. But in this political sphere that we are starting to fall within, this stuff is starting to take a back seat, and we're starting to see people present themselves differently and more harshly and more sternly. And you do have that power to control that. You really do. A drawback is that online presentation makes it easier to deceive people as well. You can represent yourself differently from who you are actually. The authenticity of someone's self presentation is difficult to assess when you're speaking to somebody online. Meeting someone in person, we have a lot more tails to go on. We have a lot more things. There's a lot less they can do to try to hide things. Warranting value is also going to be the level of trustworthiness of someone's online self-description. And that's going to be determined whether or not it can be verified by others. So you can improve your online self-presentation in several ways. Select an appropriate screen name. Consider what you want to call yourself very carefully, right? Make sure that you pay some close attention to an appropriate screen name. Make wise choices about the words and images you use. Again, this stuff is permanent and public. It could come back to haunt you. Beware of allowing content on your web page, if you have one, that's going to diminish your self-image. Be careful what you publish, where you publish it, and how you publish it. Okay? And another great thing you can do, especially in this day and age, is routinely search for what other people are posting online. And you can do this through a simple Google search. You could do this through Facebook search engines, through Twitter search engines. You can search and see what things are being said to help maintain, the ideal self and the ought self to become closer together. Just remember that current and future employers may use the internet to research you. So make your online self presentation match the way you want them to perceive you, or set it to private. But even in this day and age, when you set it to private, you may upset a friend who then goes and takes a screenshot and then goes and makes that public. Here's the thing about that privacy stuff. You have the illusion of privacy in those social areas, those social arenas. Everything you post becomes property of whatever social platform that you're working with. And this means that other people, even if you have your account set to private and everything else, other people can screenshot what you say and post that into a public forum, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Okay? So consider these things. Even when you have a privacy, how well do you really trust the people that you're with on there? So let's move on here. Making relationship choices and workplace self-disclosure, right? Connections are essential to happiness. Workplace connections are essential to happiness. It honestly is. People are much happier in a job if they get along with the people they work with. But they can also be tricky, and especially when it comes to disclosing personal information. Use the steps that we've talked about to navigate those things. Okay, my name is Richard Ward. I really appreciate you guys sticking around for this lecture. That's going to do it for this one. Stay tuned. The next one in our intercultural lecture series is coming up very soon. And thanks for watching.